Imagine you die in battle and wake up in a massive hall full of people who look just like you. You're all battered, hungry, and before you can catch your breath, they shove you into the next fight. Yeah, you're not catching a break. This is the disturbing heaven iceberg, and things only get darker from here. Tier 1. Islamic Jannah. According to scholars of Islam, Jannah is the most beautiful place anyone could ever imagine. Think endless gardens, rivers of wine, milk, water, and honey, perfect weather, and bodies that never get sick or age. The Islamic prophet Muhammad described it as something so beyond human comprehension that no one's ever seen it, heard it, or even thought of it. The thing though is that getting in isn't exactly easy. To begin with, belief is central. Good deeds like feeding the needy and helping orphans matter. But if your faith doesn't line up with things like the belief in the oneness of God, angels, revealed books, messengers, and repentance to God, you might not make the cut. Even if you do make it in, don't expect an equal slice of paradise. Jannah has levels. Some believers get the top tier experience, while others are stuck in the spiritual equivalent of economy class. But the place is designed for joy, not guilt, so you'll still have it good, just not as good as the people above you. Then there's the part about the Huris. In the part of the Quran that talks about Jannah, the righteous are promised these mysterious companions called Huris that are pure and strikingly beautiful. There's an endless supply of meat, fruits, wine that doesn't cause hangovers, and servant boys described as being spotless like pearls to carry endless trays of food. But whether they're literal, symbolic, or both depends on who you ask. Also, in Jannah, you never sleep because you're never tired in the first place. There are palaces made with silver and gold, gardens that go on forever, angels sing in Arabic, and everything is beautiful. That's oddly specific, but there's more. Right next to all that joy is the constant reminder of what's waiting on the other side. The Quran doesn't hold back when describing Jahannam. Instead, for every pleasure in Jannah, there's a mirror of horror in hell. Burning skin, chains of fire, rivers of boiling liquids, you name it. And here's where it gets grim. Some scholars say people in Jannah know exactly what's happening to the ones who didn't make it. Not everyone agrees though. Another sect of people say even believers who sin badly won't get in the right way. First, they'll have to burn in hell for a bit, just to get cleaned up. Then, and only then, can they step into paradise. If you think this is intense, wait till tier 2, and you'll hear about the paradise that's actually a never-ending battlefield. In the meantime, let's go over this version of heaven whose souls spend eternity with the Lord and Lady of the dead. Mictlan. Mictlan was one of the Aztec afterlife destinations. And if you think a 4-year death march through a soul-shredding obstacle course counts as paradise, you'll really like this one. In Aztec belief, most people don't get a fancy afterlife. Mictlan is the default setting for anyone who dies of old age, illness, or anything that isn't dramatic enough to impress the gods. So if you didn't die in battle, or during childbirth, or from a lightning strike, or even by drowning, congratulations, you qualify for Mictlan. Qualifying is the easy part, but making it in, that's where things get complicated. First, your soul has to travel through 9 levels of the underworld. You'll cross collapsing mountains, survive a wind that tears your flesh with obsidian blades, swim through a river of blood, and face jaguars. All of this while already dead. The trip takes 4 years, assuming you're lucky. If you had a dog buried with you, the dog-headed god Shalat would show up to help guide you. If not, well, good luck making it out there. At the bottom level, you'll finally reach Mictlan, which is ruled by Mictlan Tecutli and Mictlantecuhtli. They're the Lord and Lady of the Dead, and they're not exactly warm hosts. They sit in the shadows, bone-faced, quietly collecting souls. They don't hand out punishments or rewards. It's more like, alright, you made it. Now go sit over there forever. Unlike other heavens that promise joy, reunion, or at least some harp music, Mictlan offers no pleasure, or even torture to spice things up. Just permanent, dreamless rest in the lowest layer of the universe. To the Aztecs, death was something to be endured, survived, and eventually settled into. Mythology also ties Mictlan into creation stories. It says that Quetzalcoatl, one of the main gods, once tricked his way in to steal bones from Mictlan to make new humans. But he fell into a trap, dropped the bones, and some of them broke. That's supposedly why people come in different sizes. Elysium. Elysium was paradise in ancient Greek myths. The Elysian fields were where heroes went after death, and not just anyone could get in. At first, it was mostly for demigods and legendary warriors, but over time, the door opened a bit. People who lived just and virtuous lives, at least according to poets like Pindar and Virgil, and philosophers such as Plato and Cicero, could also end up there. Divine favor helped, sure, but it wasn't the only way through the gate. Elysium was described as beautiful, with blue skies, gentle breezes, no pain, and no storms. People spent their days listening to music, playing sports, and laughing together. They didn't have to work, which is pretty cool. And they also didn't grow old or cry. But there's more to it than meets the eye. To begin with, entrance into Elysium was something you could earn, depending on who was doing the judging. If the gods thought you were useful, you got in. Fighting in wars, being heroic, or living a morally upright life all had weight, depending on the version of the myth. Achilles, for example, made it in because he was a legendary warrior, not because he followed orders or had a spotless record. Meanwhile, plenty of people who lived quiet, decent lives might still end up in the bland middle zone, or worse, Tartarus, where the punishment never stops. And here's where it gets weirder. In Virgil's Aeneid, the pleasures of Elysium, feasting, music, dancing, even sports, are more like faded memories than real experiences. The souls enjoy them in radiant meadows, sure, but everything's a little ghostly, a little out of reach. That version reflects Roman philosophy at the time, especially ideas from thinkers like Cicero, who, in the Dream of Scipio, leaned into a more spiritual take on the afterlife. Later on, Plotinus took it even further, treating places like Elysium as metaphors for the soul's climb toward the divine. Homer, on the other hand, didn't bother with symbolism. In the Odyssey, Elysium is a real spot at the edge of the earth, where lucky mortals like Menelaus, who were handpicked by the gods, get sent to skip death entirely. There was a way out, though. Myths say you could choose to leave Elysium and be reborn, but who would want to trade comfort for another round of disease, war, and aging? Needless to say, most people stayed put. Christian heaven. In Christianity, heaven is the big prize. It's described as perfect, eternal, and full of light. A place where pain, death, and sorrow don't exist, and where the saved go to live forever with God. At least, that's the idea most people grow up hearing. But the Bible doesn't give much detail. For something that's supposed to be the ultimate destination, it's surprisingly vague. Most of what we think of, like golden streets, pearl gates, and angels with wings, comes from the book of Revelation. And even that sounds more unsettling than comforting if you actually read it. In Revelation chapter 21, heaven is described as a massive city. New Jerusalem, coming down from heaven after God wipes out the old world. The earth as we know it will be gone, replaced by a new heaven and a new earth, and the holy city will be the centerpiece of this reset. So, in a way, heaven starts where the apocalypse ends. Inside this city, the saved are supposed to live in peace and worship God forever. But there's a catch. Somewhere outside its gates, everyone else is burning forever. That includes people who didn't believe, people who weren't chosen, or just people who ended up on the wrong side of the final judgment. The joy of heaven exists right next to the screams of hell. Well, not right next to it, but you get the point. This has been a headache for Christian thinkers for centuries. How do you enjoy paradise knowing others didn't make it? Some old theologians believed the saved would somehow be comforted by justice being served. Others leaned into the idea that God's presence would bring such peace that the pain of others wouldn't even register. Either way, it's not exactly the warm reunion people picture. Then there's the issue of free will. Many believe that in heaven, people can no longer sin, not because they overcome it, but because they're so overwhelmed by God's presence that disobedience isn't even possible. So you're good forever. But that's because there's no other option. That raises the question, is it still love if it's not a choice? This is still the tame stuff. In Tier 5, there's a heaven coming up where the dead have to jump off a tree root into the ocean. But before we get to that, let's take a detour to the land of bliss. Buddhist Pure Land. Sukhavati. In Pure Land Buddhism, there's this idea of a place called Sukhavati, also known as the land of bliss. It's a realm offering escape from suffering, where life after death is peaceful, pure, and perfect. It was created by Amitabha Buddha for people who were trying to reach enlightenment, but were too weighed down by all the baggage that comes with being human. Sounds decent so far, but wait till you hear what it actually looks like. The ground's not just nice, it's crystal. The trees don't grow fruit, they grow treasure. Rivers don't carry water, they carry scented liquids. The sky just rains flowers constantly, like it's stuck in some never-ending festival. Everything glows, everything shines, everything is gold, and everything is perfect. Almost too perfect. At first, it comes off like a peaceful retreat, but when you look closer, it starts to feel like you're not in the real world anymore, which I guess is the whole idea. Nothing dies, nothing breaks, and suffering's out the window. Also, nobody gets old. Everyone just stays young and beautiful forever. So what do people do there? Practitioners say that the folks in the Pure Land spend their time soaking up Amitabha's teachings, meditating, and working toward enlightenment. But in most descriptions, The core practice seems to be chanting, specifically reciting Amitabha's name. It's not just mindless repetition though. The chanting is a form of meditative devotion, meant to dissolve ego and deepen one's connection to Amitabha, gradually guiding the soul toward awakening. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Some interpretations say it doesn't matter what kind of life you lived. You could have spent it stealing, lying, even killing, and still end up in this paradise. As long as you sincerely call on Amitabha before you die, you get a spot. But it's not universally agreed upon. In many versions, last-minute chanting isn't always a guaranteed golden ticket. Intent, sincerity, and your overall karmic baggage still play a role. And the longer you sit with it, the weirder it feels. In this place, there's no pain, but also no conflict. Everyone's smiling, but no one's really growing. They're just waiting. Forever. Behind all the pretty colors and constant chanting is a world that some say never moves forward. You don't really live there. You just exist. Until maybe you become a Buddha too. In Tier 5, there's a heaven that has gold palaces, fragrant fruits, and lotus-covered streets. But first, let's talk about where Vikings thought they were headed after getting chopped up in battle. Tier 2, Valhalla. You're a Viking. Axe in hand, blood on your beard, right in the thick of battle and loving every second of it. Because if you die here, mid-chaos, you might just score a ticket to Valhalla. That's the golden hall in the sky where warriors fight all day, feast all night, and drink endless mead without ever really dying. But here's the catch. Not just any death will do. If you trip over a rock, catch a fever, or die peacefully in your sleep, that's a hard no. Valhalla is strictly VIP, reserved for those who fall in battle. Only then do the Valkyries come to collect. Now, the Valkyries weren't your typical angels. They were icy-eyed warrior women who flew over battlefields, choosing who got the honor of heading to Valhalla after death. Imagine falling in battle while a divine woman watches, sizing you up for the afterlife VIP list. Once you're in Valhalla, the fun never really stops. Every morning you wake up, strap on your armor, and go kill each other. Literally. Swords through faces, axes through ribs, guts in the snow. They fight until they're in pieces. Then they come back to life, clean up, and do it again tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. And the day after that. Forever. At night, they feast, but not on variety. Just one beast. Serimnir, the same boar killed and cooked daily, then magically reborn by morning so it can be butchered again. The meat's endless, sure, but I can't help thinking that it's the Viking version of microwave leftovers. Meanwhile, Odin sits on his throne, sipping wine and watching everything. His ravens spy on the world and whisper everything they see into his ears. But don't think it's all high fives and brotherhood. Old enemies end up here too. One poem from the Poetic Edda casually mentions a dead king making his rival scrub floors and wash dogs for eternity. So yeah, you're in paradise. But that guy you disemboweled 20 years ago might be waiting to spit in your drink in heaven. But the real kicker is that Valhalla isn't the final stop. It's just a glorified locker room. Everyone's gearing up for Ragnarok, aka the end of everything. Well, sorta. When it hits, Valhalla's warriors will charge out, 800 at a time, through each of its 540 doors, into a battle they already know they'll lose. In the end, only a few gods and 2 humans will survive, and the world would be reborn. If you're still reeling from the chaos that is Valhalla, just wait until Tier 3, when you'll hear about an exclusive paradise that's only for those who died by drowning or some water-related disease. Aaru, Field of Reeds. When someone died in ancient Egypt, paradise wasn't handed over with a prayer and a flower garland. First, the dead had to go on trial. And not the nice kind, where you can hire a fancy lawyer to argue your innocence. You stood in a cold hall before Osiris and his dark court, while your heart was taken from your chest and placed on a giant scale. On the other side of the scale, there'd be a feather. Not just any feather, though. This one belonged to Mot, the goddess of truth. If your heart was heavier than the feather, full of guilt, lies, and bad decisions, the scale tipped, and that would bring forth Amit, a nightmarish being with a crocodile head, a lion's mane, and a hippo's body. So, basically a combination of every animal you don't want charging at you. If the scale didn't go your way, Amit would snap up your heart in her jaws, and you would suffer a second death worse than the first. Some texts suggest that souls subjected to Amit's second death are stuck wandering the Duat forever, while others say they just blink out of existence. Either way, one thing's certain. They weren't getting paradise. But even if you passed the scale test, you weren't in the clear just yet. You had to survive a trip through a brutal spiritual obstacle course. Depending on the version, there were 15 or 21 gates, and each was guarded by something strange. Snake-headed gods, demon bulls, monsters that don't blink, you name it. If you slipped up even once, you'd be cast back into the shadows, never to see the light again. Only after all that could you finally reach Aaru, the Field of Reeds. At first, Aaru looks perfect. Endless green fields, peaceful rivers, soft sunlight. But then you would notice something weird. This paradise wasn't exactly a vacation. Unless you were royalty or high up the social ladder. You still had to work, as in participate in actual field labor. You'd farm, fish, hunt, and harvest again. The same stuff you did in life, just forever. To the ancient Egyptians, that was the dream. Stability and familiarity. Eternal life in a place without pain or surprises. But for everyone else, it kind of sounds like being stuck at your old job for all of eternity with slightly better weather. If you're not a fan of working in heaven, I've got news for you. There's a heaven coming up where you'll still have to work. And this time, your ancestors will be your co-workers. Tir na Nog, Celtic. Tir na Nog shows up in old Irish myths as part of the Irish Otherworld system with great weather, lush landscapes, and way too much partying. It's a place where nobody ages, nobody gets sick, the sun never sets, and life is just one endless feast. There's singing, laughing, drinking, you name it. It's the ultimate break from reality. But like most places in this iceberg, there's a catch. In some stories, it's where living heroes and the favored dead end up, especially those tied to the Tuatha De Danann, the old gods of Ireland. Other myths describe it as one of many otherworld realms, like Magmel or Tek Duin, where souls go after death depending on how they lived, who they served, or who they knew. But there's no official roadmap, because Irish mythology isn't known for being very well documented. Here's what we do know. Tir na Nog is usually credited with being a paradise-like realm. Mortals don't just stumble in here, they're invited. Think warriors, poets, chosen lovers of fairy women, that type of thing. It's a heaven you earn by catching the right eye or living the right story. Take the story of Ushin, for example. He rode off to Tir na Nog with Neem, this beautiful woman from the realm, and thought he spent 3 blissful years with her. Everything was perfect. Then one day, he missed home. Neem agreed to let him go back on one condition. He must never touch the ground. Ushin agreed, but when he returned to Ireland, nothing looked familiar. The fields, the people, the language, everything had changed. 300 years had passed. Ireland had moved on without him. And when he leaned down to help some strangers move a boulder and accidentally touched the ground, all those centuries hit him at once. His body aged in seconds. His skin probably cracked. His bones gave out. And just like that, he dropped dead. That's the part most people know. But there are darker stories too. One version says the king of Tir na Nog must race up a hill every 7 years to keep his crown. If he loses, he dies. No questions asked. One king got a prophecy that his future son-in-law would beat him in the race. So, naturally, he cursed his daughter with an animal head to keep anyone from marrying her. And yeah, as far as we know, that actually worked. Tir na Nog might sound like paradise, but it's not exactly built for humans. Mortals who arrive by sea, by magical horse, or fairy invitation often think they're just stopping by. They don't realize they're entering a place where time forgets them, but the real world doesn't. And when they try to go back, the world they knew is gone. If they're lucky, they age and die instantly. If not, they never find their way home at all. Chinese Taoist heaven. Tian. At first, Tian sounds like a peaceful idea. It's often described as a vast, boundless sky or celestial dome, deep blue or black, shimmering with stars and streaked with clouds. But in ancient China, Tian wasn't just some heavenly retirement home in the clouds. It was law. It was order. And if you were alive back then, it was the force keeping your crops alive or wiping them out. But here's the thing. Tian wasn't always kind. If the world was out of balance or if humans stepped out of line, it would hit back with disaster. Floods, famine, and earthquakes would come knocking. Entire dynasties collapsed because rulers were believed to have lost the favor of Tian. This was called the Mandate of Heaven. So if your kingdom fell, it wasn't just politics. It was because heaven itself had turned its back on you. To understand how complex this concept is, you have to realize that Tian isn't always one thing. Sometimes it's a god, sometimes it's a force, and sometimes it's a radiant realm stacked with other heavens. Taoist beliefs speak of 36 heavens stacked above our world like invisible floors of a divine tower. The higher you go, the stranger it gets. In the highest heaven lives Yuanshi Tianzin, a being so vast and so abstract that it barely resembles anything human. Some Tian realms were ruled by immortals who were anything but saints. They were cruel, selfish, and would even pick fights with each other. In Shangqing Taoism, certain heavens were thought to be evil because they were ruled by jealous spirits and twisted gods that didn't in any way match the description of what you'd expect from a place called heaven. Also, ghosts, dragons, shapeshifters, and even demons were all part of the scenery. If all this somehow has you intrigued and thinking about paying a visit, just know that if you climbed high enough, there's a good chance you'd come face to face with a silent void. Tian sounds like a lot, but at least it's not a temporary paradise where you get kicked out when your karma expires. Akan Asamando. In the forests of Ghana, there's a place the Akan call Asamando, the land of the dead. It's often tied to Asaseya, the earth goddess, and while it's described as a paradise with good soil, peaceful spirits, and a final resting place for the departed, it's not just some calm spiritual retreat. This is a heaven with rules. The ancestors are watching. The gods don't tolerate nonsense, and paradise comes with conditions. Asamando is where good souls go after death, mainly those who die naturally, live honorably, and receive the proper burial rites. If you mess up any part of that equation, you risk getting stuck between worlds or coming back as a restless spirit. So yeah, entry isn't guaranteed. And even if you get in, don't expect clouds and harps. Some believers say Asamando is basically a perfected version of the Akan homeland, meaning it's calm, fertile, and orderly. The dead live in villages, they keep farming, and they still have social duties. It's more like getting promoted to the Elder Council than retiring to a spa. You're still involved, just on a higher plane. The entrance, according to Ashanti tradition, is guarded by Amokya, a spirit woman who welcomes the women's souls at a river and accepts their offerings before they cross to Asamando. Asaseya, the earth goddess, rules over Asamando, but she also watches over the land of the living. She rests on Thursdays, and you're not supposed to disturb the land on her day. So no farming, no digging, nothing. Break that rule and the land will turn on you. Crops will die, families will go hungry, and everyone will know it's your fault. Then there are the Abosom, the lesser gods under the creator Nyame. They control rivers, rocks, storms, pretty much every natural thing that can ruin your day. Some can heal you, and others just destroy things. The mountain gods, aka the Abo, are associated with healing and medicine, while the Iwim, or sky gods, are said to be the worst. They're known for handing out punishments without warning. One wrong move and they'll hit you with lightning, literally. It doesn't matter if the sky was clear 2 seconds ago. To keep them calm, priests pour alcohol on the ground and whisper prayers. But that doesn't always work. When the gods get restless, they send witches. These witches aren't like the ones you see on TV, who hold hands and read from spellbooks. They rip through families. Once they enter the picture, people start acting strange, getting sick for no reason, or just dropping dead. And in the middle of all this, there's Anansi the spider, who just happens to be the trickster figure in this belief system. He once helped shape humans, but now he just causes trouble. He pushes people into bad decisions and watches what happens next. Even in Asamando, the dead don't get to totally check out. The Nsamanfo, or ancestors, can come back if they're ignored. Forget to say their name or offer a sacrifice, and they'll return angry, bringing sickness, chaos, or worse. Tier 3. Shambhala, Tibetan. Somewhere in the Himalayas or beyond, past the snow, the silence, and the altitude sickness, there's said to be a hidden kingdom called Shambhala. But this isn't your standard afterlife destination. In Tibetan Buddhism, Shambhala isn't just a place where souls go after death. It's more of a spiritual realm, a higher dimension reserved for only those who've reached a rare level of enlightenment through Kala Chakra initiation. You can think of it as a paradise checkpoint for advanced practitioners who mastered the Kala Chakra teachings. Getting in requires more than just dying with good karma. You've got to do the spiritual homework too. On the surface, it sounds like a spiritual jackpot, a land of pure light, enlightened beings, and ultimate wisdom, where the future Buddha, Maitreya, is said to be waiting with an army strong enough to steamroll the world. But hey, the army isn't coming for you, so it's not so bad, right? Wrong. According to the Kala Chakra prophecies, the end of the world doesn't begin with a comet or a plague. It starts when human greed, lies, and non-stop war choke the planet. That's when the last king of Shambhala will ride out with great force. The sky will darken, armies will march, and evil will be wiped off the face of the earth. Not exactly peaceful monk behavior. It's not really clear whether or not the souls who've made it into Shambhala at this point will participate in the war. The truth is, peace exists here, but only if you obey. That hasn't stopped people from trying to find it though. Over the centuries, Shambhala has attracted a weird crowd. There have been monks hoping to unlock higher wisdom, which makes sense. But then there were also Nazis who thought they could weaponize it, and Soviets who wanted to turn it into the blueprint for the perfect communist warrior. Even now, people still hunt for it, claiming it's buried somewhere in the Altai Mountains or deep in the Himalayas. But if anyone actually finds it, chances are they won't walk into a holy city. They'll unleash whatever that army's been preparing for. Aztec Tlalocan. In the old stories of the Aztecs, there's a place called Tlalocan, a lush green paradise ruled by the rain god Tlaloc. It's one of the 4 main Aztec afterlife destinations, and while it wasn't reserved for saints or warriors, it was still seen as a kind of heaven, a reward for those who died by water. Think endless greenery, sweet fruits, blooming flowers, and eternal spring. But there's also a catch. You didn't get in by being good. You had to die the right way, by drowning, lightning strike, or some kind of water-related disease. As long as your death involved water, congratulations, you've qualified. Once your body starts rotting in the mud, your soul doesn't float upward like in the movies. Instead, it sinks, pulled under the earth by whirlpools or dragged off in a storm, straight into Tlaloc's world. That might sound grim, but to the Aztecs, it was a sacred journey. Water was life, and dying through it meant you were chosen to be part of nature's eternal cycle. But this paradise wasn't quiet or calm. It was alive. The winds in Tlalocan were by no means peaceful breezes. They carried the voices of the dead. In storm caves, the god of the winds and his helpers, a team of black toads, sit around cauldrons, cooking up weather. The result is something called mal aires, evil winds that drift into the world and bring sudden sickness or death. They also served as signs, punishments, or messages from the divine. If you headed south, you'd find a boiling spring in a cave that's home to a giant worm with flaming spit. It tunnels through the earth, and its saliva melts the ground. Yes, it sounds insane, but in Tlalocan, even monsters had a role in the divine order. If you decided to head east instead, you'll find a black lake made of endless tears. A ghostly woman stands by the edge, weeping non-stop. Her hobby is luring kids and lonely wanderers into the water, where they end up trapped in underwater cities with no way out. Then there's the West. That's where the Death Woman and Wind Woman hang out. They are said to be spirits that roam around looking for men who were unfaithful or just generally useless. Once they find someone, they rip out his soul with frozen claws and drag it back to their lair to torment forever. Even now, some shamans claim they visit Tlalocan in dreams. They say whirlpools pull them into the underworld, where they fight or bargain for the souls of the sick. Whether that's bravery or some type of fever dream is still up for debate. Tlalocan is technically a paradise, but once you get past the greenery, it's really just a flooded underworld with violent weather, vengeful spirits, and toads that control the weather. This one's pretty exclusive, but there's a paradise in Tier 5 where you have to die 3 times just to get in. Slavic Vyraj. Vyraj was the Slavic version of heaven, or at least the nice version where you could end up after death. People believed it was located somewhere in the heavens or beyond the sea at the Milky Way's end. Birds flew there in the winter, and apparently so did souls. It was said to be warm, lush with trees, basically eternal vacation weather. But getting in wasn't easy. You had to be cremated first. Fire was believed to be the only way to crack open the barrier between worlds, with the rising smoke acting like an elevator for your soul. That was the general idea anyway. Some stories said the soul flew like a bird. Others claimed it spun through some cosmic whirlpool. Slavic thinkers couldn't agree on the fine print. They also debated whether Vyraj was a final stop or just a layover before reincarnation. So depending on the source, you either stayed forever or eventually got recycled. At the gate of Vyraj stood Veles, the god of everything people typically avoid: death, livestock, snakes, and the underworld. He guarded the entrance, sometimes appearing as a raro, a fiery bird clutching the keys to the otherworlds. Behind him, or beside him, depending on who's telling, stood a giant cosmic tree connecting heaven, earth, and the realm below. Souls were believed to live in its branches, but only if you made the cut. As time went by, Christianity entered the mix, and Vyraj was split into 2 realms. The upper realm was light, peaceful, and everything you'd hope for in the afterlife. But the lower version, that's where things got grim. Tucked deep in the roots of the cosmic tree was a dark and shadowy version of Vyraj that was cold, snake-infested, and packed with rot and suffering. Some say it had dead things biting other dead things. You get the idea. Over time, this lower Vyraj started blending into Nav, the Slavic underworld. Zoroastrian Garothman. In Zoroastrian belief, everyone crosses the Shinvat bridge after death. Doesn't matter who you were. Rich, poor, decent, awful. You end up at the same place, the edge of the world, staring at a narrow beam-shaped bridge stretched over a black void. It's called the Sifting Bridge because it separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. And some traditions even identify it with the rainbow or the Milky Way. It glows faintly in the dark, and it's the only way to reach the afterlife. There are two dogs at the start of the bridge. They each have 4 eyes and aren't just for decoration. They guard the path and see what kind of person you really were. Then comes the test. If you lived a good life, kept your word, helped people, didn't act like a walking red flag, the bridge gets wider. You're met by your Daina, which is basically a spirit representing revelation. She appears as a calm, glowing woman, and her role is to walk with you, reassure you, and lead you toward the House of Song. That's where good souls go. It's peaceful, there's music, and you're surrounded by light. According to Zoroastrian texts, it's a place where the soul lives in truth, alongside Ahura Mazda and other righteous spirits, forever. But if you lived selfishly, lied, cheated, or just made life miserable for everyone else, the bridge narrows to a razor's edge. Walking it becomes almost impossible. Then the punishment kicks in. A demon called Chinafapas waits underneath. It doesn't talk or ask questions. It just grabs you and yanks you off the bridge. When that happens, you'll fall straight into the House of Lies, a place reserved for the worst people. It's not a metaphor, by the way. You literally drop. Zoroastrians believed that 3 judges were involved in the process: Mithra, or covenant, Sraosha, or conscience, and Rashnu, or justice. They look over everything you did in life, and then decide if you go forward or drop off the edge forever. Some accounts describe the Shinvat Bridge as being faintly visible on the night sky, stretched across the Milky Way like a narrow band of light. Observers claimed you could watch it and imagine who was making it across and who wasn't. But whether that's true or not, it doesn't really matter, because everyone crosses eventually. Tier 4. Hindu Svarga. In Hindu cosmology, Svarga is one of the heavens. It's not the highest, and it's definitely not the final stop. It's more like a nice break between lives, if you earned it. The rules are simple. Do enough good in your last life, follow Dharma, win a war, make some serious offerings, and you get in. What happens next is textbook paradise. There's endless food, music that never stops, and celestial women called apsaras who exist solely to entertain. And then comes the problem. Everything in Svarga comes at a cost. Every bite, every song, every dance with an apsara, it all chips away at your punya, the spiritual merit that got you through the door. You eat punya by doing things like offering hospitality or performing sacrifices. But once it runs out, so does your time in heaven. 1 minute you're feasting in gold-lit halls, the next you're plummeting back to earth. The soul will pass through clouds, land as rain, and eventually wind up in someone's rice bowl. From there, it's back into the human cycle. And while most people are too distracted to care, some of the guests in this version of heaven don't forget how they die. So it's not unusual for fights to break out or rivalries to flare up again. If you're paying close enough attention, you might even catch a fist fight over a past life duel. Indra, the god who runs the place, lives in the palace of Vaijayantha with his consort, Indrani. The palace includes the Grand Siddharma Hall, and it sits in Amaravati, the capital of Svarga. The whole city is guarded by Airavata, India's massive celestial elephant. That's right, even when you're a king in heaven, you apparently still need good security. So while Svarga looks perfect from a distance, it runs on borrowed time, borrowed peace, and has a ruler who's always watching his back. Jehovah Witness. Paradise, heaven. In Jehovah's Witness doctrine, heaven, as most people think of it, isn't for everyone. In fact, it's not even for most witnesses. That version of heaven is reserved for exactly 144,000 handpicked Christians. These are anointed ones, who, after death, are taken to heaven to rule as kings and priests alongside Jesus. The rest of the faithful get something else. Paradise on earth. And yes, that's a separate destination. This earthly paradise is a resurrected version of the Garden of Eden. After Armageddon, which will be a divinely executed global judgment that wipes out all human governments and everyone who knowingly rejected the truth, Jesus will take over, and he'll reign for 1,000 years, assisted by the 144,000 from heaven. You won't see these rulers, though, because they'll be running things remotely from the spirit realm. So what does paradise look like? It's Earth 2.0. People will live forever, build houses, plant vineyards, and eat the fruit of their labor. There'll be no sickness, war, old age, or death. At least, not for those who obey. The natural world will be restored. Animals will stop attacking people, and the entire population will worship Jehovah in unity. It all sounds peaceful, but there are a few stipulations. Only those who survive Armageddon or are resurrected during the millennium will get in. This includes both the righteous and unrighteous, which in practice means faithful witnesses and billions of other people from history who may never have even heard of Jehovah. Everyone gets a second chance to learn and obey. But there's a catch. The standard is spiritual perfection. You'll be expected to live in full alignment with God's will. That includes your actions, thoughts, and relationships, all of which will be judged by theocratic guidelines. Near the end of the 1,000 years, Satan will be released one final time to tempt humanity. If you fail, that's when it's game over. You don't even get hell, just permanent destruction. If you pass, well, congratulations. You now get to live forever in a global society united in worship and purpose under permanent theocratic rule. Mormonism. In Mormon doctrine, heaven is a tiered system, like a spiritual caste structure. At the top of the celestial kingdom is where God lives. It's where you're supposed to want to go. The problem is, it's not easy to get in, or particularly comforting once you know the details. According to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS teachings, almost everyone gets into heaven, just not the same one. There are 3 degrees of glory: celestial, terrestrial, and telestial. Only those who meet specific requirements get into the celestial kingdom, which is considered the highest and best. It's the end goal of Mormon salvation, the final home of God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost. If you make it there, congratulations. You are now engaged in eternal progression and divine responsibilities. Again, lose the idea of rest. Those who make it here are either baptized Mormons who kept their covenants and performed every required ordinance, or the dead who accept proxy baptisms and sealings done on their behalf. Once inside, you don't just reunite with family. You become sealed to them permanently. Your marriage lasts forever, but only if it was done in an LDS temple. Celestial marriage is required for exaltation, the highest level within the celestial kingdom, and you are bound by eternal covenants. You're gods now, so you and your spouse will eventually have your own worlds to populate with spirit children. Yep, there is reproduction, and it's an assignment, an eternal role as creators of spirit children. Everyone gets a white stone with a new name on it, but that name is secret. It's kind of part of your access credentials in the afterlife. The stone becomes a seer device, called a Urim and Thummim, so you can receive revelations for eternity. A personal divine tablet, if you will. If you're not married or not Mormon, or you had a chance and rejected it, then you don't make it in, and you're downgraded to the terrestrial or telestial kingdoms. Still technically heaven, just not one where you become a god and rule a world. Only the top-tier believers get to do that. If your idea of paradise is structured eternal responsibility inside a divine bureaucracy, where the reward is becoming the management, this'll be glorious. Finnish Lintukoto. In old Finnish belief, there was a place way out past the edge of the world, near the sky's dome, called Lintukoto, which roughly translates to the home of the birds. People said it was warm year-round, untouched by winter, and full of light. Birds flew there when the cold came. It was believed to be a kind of paradise watched over by powerful figures like Ukko, the old sky god, who wasn't exactly gentle. When he was angry, he cracked the sky open with thunder, wielding a hammer or axe, depending on the tale. In Finnish and surrounding traditions, the birds weren't just migrating. They were soul couriers. And when they flew south for winter, they were heading home to Lintukoto. When they returned in spring, they sometimes brought souls back with them for rebirth. They used the Milky Way as some sort of cosmic highway between worlds, and that's how it earned the name Linnunrata, or the Path of the Birds. In the middle of all this was a cosmic whirl, a literal spinning hole in the sky, sitting right where the heavens turned. The world was believed to have been formed out of a bird's egg, or eggs, depending on who you asked, and the sky was said to be the upper cover of the egg. The stars moved because the sky was a giant dome, slowly spinning around the North Star, and at its center was a funnel, pulling things inward. This was the gateway to Tuonela, the underworld. People believed that if your soul drifted too far during dreams, especially if you were young or sick, you might get pulled into the whirl. That's why families carved tiny wooden birds and placed them near sleeping children. They were supposed to keep their souls from flying away in the night. Shamans, trained in spirit travel, would try to cross through that spinning sky hole, hoping to visit Tuonela and make it back. The few who actually managed to pull it off did so by tricking the guards, but more often than not, they never returned. After all, there's a reason Tuonela was known as a dark, silent place where nothing moved, and souls almost never came back. Gan Eden. The Jewish idea of paradise, Gan Eden, is actually 2 paradises, because after humanity showed up, one just didn't cut it anymore. There's the lower Gan Eden, the physical garden from Genesis where Adam and Eve got evicted for fruit-related crimes, and then there's the higher Gan Eden, the spiritual afterlife reserved for the most righteous souls. Getting in is not simple. First, your soul passes through the lower Gan Eden, where Adam himself stands at the gate. Then a cherub with a flaming sword checks your credentials. If you don't make the cut, the sword deletes you immediately. Only the spiritually qualified get to move on. Those lucky few ascend on a pillar of fire and smoke to reach the higher Gan Eden. So what is this higher Gan Eden actually like? According to rabbinic texts, it's a divine garden in name, but don't expect hammocks or wine fountains. This paradise is all about the soul. Once you're in, there's no pleasure buffet, no family reunion, and no unlimited supply of grapes. Instead, you walk with God, clothed in light, and attend endless Torah lessons in the glow of His presence. In Gan Eden, there's a hierarchy, but it's not high school, so the top spots don't go to jocks and cheerleaders. There are 7 compartments, and where you sit depends on your merit. The holier you were, the closer you get to God's throne. If you were just mildly righteous, you're still in, but way in the back. Even in paradise, seating charts matter. Oh, and not everyone who's righteous ends up in the same room. Martyrs get their own zone. So do childless scholars. The well-behaved poor also have their section. So good luck finding your loved ones. All the righteous get to live it up in Gan Eden, but the unrighteous, they don't get in at all. Their souls get sent to Gehenna, a fiery purification zone for anywhere between 12 months and eternity, depending on their sins. Tier 5, Isles of the Blessed. The Isles of the Blessed, also called the Fortunate Isles, are ancient Greece's piece of heaven, where a tiny elite get to live forever in peace, beauty, and athletic leisure. It is by no means for regular dead people. This is an exclusive afterlife for the spiritual overachievers. To get in, you have to die 3 times. Literally. Only souls who are reincarnated 3 times and judged righteous every time are allowed in. You need 3 lifetimes of spotless performance. Slip up once and it's game over. Most people can barely get through 1 life without tripping over their own moral compass. But that's besides the point. Once you earn your entry, you get a spot on a semi-legendary, climate-controlled island that's rumored to sit somewhere in the Atlantic. In the Isle of the Blessed, there's no winter or heat. You only get soft breezes, fertile trees, and gentle rains that sound like poetry. You spend eternity strolling through shaded parks, playing music, and indulging in athletic activities. Ancient Greek aristocrats considered athleticism and the arts to be the peak of existence. So, obviously, it had to feature in paradise. The philosopher Pindar later shrunk these islands down to just 1, maybe for budget reasons, or just so everyone could hang out together. Later writers, like Lucian of Samosata, eventually mocked the whole idea by portraying the dead heroes there as bickering has-beens, squabbling in courtrooms, and gossiping like bored pensioners. The isle's shores remain pristine, unlike earthly beaches where Pliny noted sea monster carcasses might wash up, which is what happens when your heaven is still technically a beach. So to recap, this heaven is an elite island resort for the morally pure who pass the reincarnation test 3 times in a row. There's no violence or chaos, just eternal cardio, harp music, and the occasional sea beast corpse. If you want to get in, live well, then do it again, then again. And you can never mess up. It's perfect for you if you're flawless and super into throwing sports. Norse, Fólkvangr. Fólkvangr is the lesser-known Norse warrior heaven that sits in the shadow of Valhalla, which gets all the press. But this one is run by Freyja, a fertility and war goddess who also claims half the dead from every battle. The other half go to Odin, but Freyja gets first pick when they split the corpses. Fólkvangr literally means field of the host, or people field, which is poetic shorthand for a war graveyard. According to the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, this is where Freyja brings her chosen warriors after they die. She houses them in her hall, Sessrumnir. That name means seat room, or many seats, and it's a really crowded one. There's no description of what happens inside, but it's assumed to be something like Valhalla. Endless feasts, combat training, and preparing for Ragnarok, the Norse end of days. Fólkvangr is odd for a few reasons. First, the fact that it exists at all. Norse myth had already given fallen warriors a place to go, Valhalla, so why split the dead? Scholars think it might come from different traditions mashed together, or reflect separate devotees to Odin and Freyja. Either way, the result is a cosmology where paradise is militarized, overcrowded, and apparently gendered. Freyja also seems to accept noble women who die tragic or voluntary deaths. Starving yourself in grief, like the woman in Egil's saga, might get you in. So will hanging yourself in a sacred hall, like the dame in Hervara's saga. Much like Valhalla, there's no promise of peace or comfort in Fólkvangr. You're still a soldier and possibly also training for a war that hasn't happened yet. Your paradise is a field, not a palace, filled with the dead, and ruled by a goddess whose softer titles include Chooser of the Slain. Also, Pliny didn't mention this part, but the Vikings may have built their stone ship graves to reflect this belief. It's literally a ship in a field, because that's how they imagined sailing into eternity. In short, if you died well and got lucky, you might end up here. Your reward is more war forever, but now it's called heaven. Pulotu. Pulotu is the afterlife realm in many Polynesian belief systems, especially among the Tongan, Samoan, and Fijian traditions. Sometimes it's heaven, sometimes it's an underworld, and sometimes it's just both. In Tonga, it's ruled by Hikuleo, a god or goddess depending on the version, and it's considered the ancestral homeland where souls return after death. You don't need to be good, brave, or enlightened to get in. You just need to be dead. It's automatic. But don't let the heavenly branding fool you. Pulotu is not some dreamy cloud palace. It's usually described as being located under the sea or beyond the western horizon, in a place that's warm, dark, and quiet. In some traditions, it's lit only by ancestral fire or moonlight, and the dead just exist. There are no feasts or sparkling robes here, just the calm, eternal company of your ancestors in a place that feels like a mix between a sacred cave and a foggy memory. Unlike many of the heavens you've seen so far, getting into Pulotu is pretty straightforward. You die, your soul detaches, and it travels, sometimes by canoe, and sometimes by spirit path to Pulotu, where it settles in with the rest of your bloodline. Some versions claim Pulotu has levels or zones, especially for chiefs and high-ranking souls, though that hierarchy feels more cultural than divine. Either way, there's no guarantee of peace, and definitely no way out. The only real upside is that you're not stuck haunting the living. You can be thankful for that at least. Tonatiuhichan. Tonatiuhichan, or House of the Sun, was the Aztec heaven for people who didn't just die. They earned it. We're talking warriors who died in battle, people sacrificed to the sun god Tonatiuh, and, this is real, women who died in childbirth, because pushing out a baby was considered just as heroic as killing someone in war. According to Aztec belief, the sun god Tonatiuh needed constant nourishment in the form of blood and sacrifice to keep moving across the sky. Those who died in service to this cosmic duty were rewarded with entry into his domain. Tonatiuhichan was located in the eastern sky, and once you made it, you didn't get a cloud bed or a harp. Instead, you would have to join the sun's entourage, riding shotgun as it blazes across the sky. After that service, you wouldn't get to stay in Tonatiuhichan forever. Instead, your soul would return to Earth in the form of a hummingbird or butterfly. Both creatures were associated with warrior spirits and the presence of the dead, so it was an honor. That said, if your afterlife goal was eternal praise and front row seats to the apocalypse engine, look no further. But remember, you have to go out swinging to get in. Maori, Hawaiki. In Maori belief, the afterlife starts with a journey. When someone dies, their spirit travels north, across New Zealand, towards Cape Reinga, the tip of the Aupori Peninsula. There, at the edge of the land, stands a twisted pohutukawa tree, said to be 800 years old. It's never bloomed, because that's not what it's for. According to tradition, it's the ladder the dead use to leave the living world. Their spirits climb down through its roots and leap into the ocean. From there, they drift towards the Three King Islands for one last look back at the land of the living. After that, they pass into Te Renga, the hidden world beneath the sea. That's where they reach Hawaiki. Hawaiki is the ancestral homeland in Maori and many other Polynesian traditions. It's both the place where life began and the place all souls return to after death. It's often described as a sacred underground realm or spirit world that's not particularly bright or joyful. There's no judgment, no reward, and also no punishment. Everyone goes there, no matter how they lived. If you die, you go. That's it. In some versions, Hawaiki is described as a dark, silent realm without sunlight. In the Cook Islands, a similar place called Hawaiki is said to be dark when it's daylight here. So while it's not a place of torment, it's also not paradise in the usual sense. You get reunited with your ancestors, but there's no promise of happiness or rest. Traditionally, spirits were supposed to stop at a sacred spring called Te Waiora Atane, which means the living water, to purify themselves before entering the afterlife. That spring was later buried during colonial development, and locals say the water moved. Today, it still seeps from the rocks far below the cliff, out of reach. Vaikuntha, Hinduism. Vaikuntha is one of Hinduism's most prestigious versions of heaven, specifically the personal realm of Vishnu, the supreme deity. It's described as a flawless, eternal paradise located far beyond the material universe, where time, death, and suffering no longer exist. Think gated community for perfected souls, minus the HOA fees. So who gets in? Only the spiritually elite who've surrendered themselves to Vishnu and shown him pure, unwavering devotion. You can't bribe your way in, and showing up with half a decent karma record won't cut it. Vaikuntha is for those who achieve moksha, or liberation from the endless cycle of rebirth. So yeah, half-hearted temple visits or last-minute mantras won't help you here. Once you're in, the benefits are intense. Residents exist in immortal spiritual bodies and spend eternity worshipping Vishnu, hanging out in a city made of gold and gemstone palaces, walking on lotus-covered streets, and listening to divine music that never stops. Vishnu himself chills on a cosmic serpent throne, flanked by his consort Lakshmi, and surrounded by beings who literally never question his authority. Everyone's in perfect bliss, because individuality and desire have been traded in for eternal devotion, forever. The weird part is, there's no you as you remember it. Your ego dissolves. You'll have no career, no family reunions, and there'll be no pineapple on pizza debates. So yes, Vaikuntha is technically a paradise, but only if your idea of paradise is infinite identity-free worship in a realm where nothing ever changes and nobody ever argues. You either love it, or you weren't getting in anyway. Baltic, Otherworld. The Otherworld isn't a heaven or hell. In a way, it's both and neither. In ancient Baltic and other Indo-European traditions, it's the destination for all souls after death, no matter how they lived. There's no judgment, no rewards, and no punishments. You die and your journey begins, period. Across Indo-European mythologies, Celtic, Germanic, Slavic, Greek, Vedic, the path to the Otherworld almost always starts with water. You cross a river or a stream that acts as a kind of filter. Sometimes it washes away your sins, sometimes your memories. In some stories, it gives you a secret knowledge. Either way, crossing it is mandatory. When you reach the edge, you're not greeted by angels or demons. You're met by a dog. In Vedic tradition, Yama's two four-eyed hounds, like Sarvara, guide souls to his realm. In Greek myth, it's Cerberus, guarding the exit of Hades. These aren't tests of virtue, they're just checkpoints. You only need to be dead to qualify. The Otherworld itself is vague on purpose. It looks like the world you came from, but it isn't. Some Germanic sources describe halls of feasting like Valhalla. Slavic and Baltic folklore describe timeless fields or mirror lands behind the sun, where the seasons never change and time doesn't move. It's not painful, but it's not joyful either. It just is. There's not much information on rituals to guarantee access, or even temples or prayers to speed you along. You simply arrive. You might lose your name, but you might also gain prophecy or strange wisdom. So yeah, some heavens are paradise, some are strange, and some, yeah, maybe we were never meant to understand them at all. That's all the disturbing heavens we've got for today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe rethink your afterlife plans.